Antrich und der Ehre, war sich der noch angesäche. So bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gar.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And I'm Dan Baltic.
And we're here today with Manuel Marrero, who is the editor-in-chief of ExPat Lit, which is one of the prominent, nowadays, one of the prominent publishers of what Matt Forney has called the outsider literature scene. We occasionally have referred to it as dissident literature, which may be a more specific thing. I'm kind of curious what Manuel would describe whatever this scene is as, but suffice it to call it the outsider lit scene. ExPat Lit is a major player, and again, Manuel is the editor-in-chief, and Dan and I have both, I think we've both been mutual followers with Manuel for some time. I've obviously been a follower of ExPat Lit for some time, and I think we kind of just wanted to have you on to sort of meet you and learn more about you and ExPat Lit. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, and I appreciate you having me on so unprepared. Feel free to ask me anything you like. As far as your first question, I like dissident lit. I like counterculture, to refer to it. Outsider's just kind of like a little played out, I think, at this point. But like, I don't know that like any labels really like capture everything stylistically that's going on. So I don't know what to call it. It's the alternative to the cultural hegemony of like big press propaganda, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the reasons we started this pod, is to discuss literature that's outside of the traditional publishing world, because as you say, it is propaganda. And like, you look at the New York Times' top 100 list, and like, it's all, very propagandistic titles, and nothing that really seems honest or And
I've never heard of any of this stuff either. Like, I was on the New York Times yesterday looking at a profile of a book that sold a lot, and was just kind of like dumbfounded because I had never heard of the author, and the story was very much like a sort of token like identity piece,
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, it wasn't a piece, it was a book. But anyway, I haven't heard of these people. I don't know their books. I haven't read them or anything.
Right.
And I tend to avoid the swirly color books the
sort of MFA mill
right
products of it all. Yeah, I mean, it seems like the community of readers trademark, or like the very insular community of people who, not community, but the set of people in the United States that are like view themselves as readers and read these books that are on the New York Times bestseller list, seems like it's an increasingly sort of insular and politically homogenous group. I mean, there's always kind of been, obviously there's always been a literary establishment and a sort of there's always been kind of sort of literary snobs who, hone in on, a certain set of books, the New York Times bestseller list of it all. But it really seems like over the past 10 years, as readership in the general population has declined precipitously, like this kind of group of people who are reading the New York Times bestseller list and the group of people who are reading the books reviewed by NPR is this increasingly insular and ideologically and culturally homogenous group. And it's just, as you say, it's the swirly colors, the MFA graduates, the kind of laser-like focus on the diversity of it, the little excursions into other cultures kind of thing, and learning about the, I guess, oppression of it all.
Yeah,
and all with titles like "The Women in Montana Are Quiet" or something of that nature.
Yeah, usually all the reviews are paywalled. I mean, the thing is with art becoming increasingly decentralized, democratized, like, there's no real, like, coherent canon, and I think it's hard to find exactly like what all the kids are listening to or what all the kids are reading these days. Like, I don't think that such a thing exists. I mean, like, I've been crowds of people that all, like, know about ExPat, and that's been astounding to me. And I've been, like, with people who have never heard of us, and I've never heard of any of these books that supposedly sell, well, and as reported by like the New York Times or whatnot. And as I understand, a lot of that is like really fake. They like basically pay people to buy the books and to create a narrative surrounding the book before it even drops. And yeah, most of it is like kind of meh. I've ventured into some of like the bigger ones a few times, and usually the nicest thing I can say about a book like that, if it's like not uptight, is that it's just kind of mediocre. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that quality is a criteria. I think that it's focused on sort of trying to get the right kind of like marginalized, like protected identity or something to give the right kind of experience. If I was like, given an advance to write a book or something, maybe perhaps they would want me to write an immigration story or something like that. I'm not exactly the right kind of Latino, so to speak, or Latinx, as they say.
Right. Yeah, well, there's this notion that diversity sells in the, mainstream sort of publishing world, and maybe they're right on some level, because I think it's kind of this predefined audience, which is pretty white in a lot of cases, educated, probably skews pretty female, or I actually would venture to guess skews very female these days. It's basically white women with college degrees reading these kinds of books that are produced, and it's like
working from home. Yeah,
yes. Exactly.
Many email jobs.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, we're not supposed to use that term, right? Like
email jobs.
Really?
Is out
that and ivermectin will get us cut off the air?
No, I heard something about. I don't know if you guys know like Jack from Perfume Nationalist.
Yes,
he was
for sure.
He was just like, you're not allowed to use email job if you have any, if you're dirtbag left or something like that. I don't consider myself dirtbag left at all, but I am something of a political orphan. I don't know that I don't know that he'd feel comfortable with me using the term email job, and it feels like maybe he came up with it. But I'm gonna say work from home. Yeah, a lot of people who are just sort of like willfully like out of touch, just sort of like taking in these like bestseller lists. They have subscriptions to the New York Times. They go to book clubs. They go to readings. And they sort of just like reinforce their like narratives about literature. And I mean, I guess I am like kind of blissfully ignorant because I don't really like pay attention to any of it. I don't even really pay attention much to the immediate like small press competition because I just feel like it gets my head in a weird place. But especially like, the bigger stuff, like I've never heard of it, and like they kind of like trigger so many red flags that I don't end up like even picking it up,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of these mainstream books on the New York Times bestseller list and such are, these are tokens to indicate that you belong. They're tribal tokens almost. It's like I belong to this educated class of liberals, and see me reading this on the subway, and I'll tweet about it, whatever. To an extent, I think that a lot of art is tribal, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I just think in the case of literature today, it's a particularly pernicious and sort of boring, tribe, shall we say, of a certain liberal elite, circle jerk, at this point, very played out narrative.
Well, it's a glass house too, It's a pale horse shuddering. I mean, like more than ever, it's just increasingly apparent that these institutions don't necessarily command much visibility. They don't necessarily sell like books as well as like the small presses do. I mean, I would like to see some of these numbers to back up these claims of like, but like, as far as I know, they offer these completely disproportionate advances, and that's their biggest flex, is that they just have like they're just endlessly bankrolled by institutions and don't have to make a profit. They can bungle the promotion campaign. It's like I've seen authors who had big publishing contracts go on and release through small press and do a better job selling their books and promoting their books through small press than through the so-called museum, what Dave Hickey would call a museum, which is really outgrown the definition that he gave it.
Like, not surprising, because you guys actually have to make money. Right. And as you say, that's these big corporate publishers, like their literary fiction imprints routinely lose money and are designed to do so.
Right.
They're designed to promote an agenda and not sell books.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're writing to fight over every margin. I mean, we're like thinking like business people, and that doesn't like really sit well with them. Yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of people will look at what I'm doing like it's some kind of boutique hobby, but for me, it's like life and death. Like, art is important, and it should be important. It should be like kind of inseparable from what you do in your real life. At least that's how I think of it. But to each their own. And like we shouldn't be so like removed via like publicists and agents and whatnot. Like, I when I put out a book by somebody, I like to become their friend. I usually they are my friend, but I like to have like a number of conversations with them in real time over the phone and stuff like that, to really like sort of like, not, it sounds invasive, like get in their head, but like, to understand where they're writing from, where they're coming from, so that we can like do a good interview and then be on the same page when we're promoting and stuff. And then promotion itself, it kind of attention guides itself. My friend Barrett Avner would say, and I agree with that. And he also said, stay out of the results. I agree with that too.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I mean, I think it's just what people are attracted to with small press is just the organic like nature of it, the hands-on like personal touch, the human aspects that have been sort of ferreted out of like big industry publishing. Everything just seems like this kind of like soft focus grouped like caricature that is
right.
Yeah,
there's a lot of middlemen that you're always going through in the mainstream world, and ExPat, as well as Terror House and some of these other presses in our sphere, do a really good job of allowing, I think, voices to kind of reach an audience much more directly. But this might be a good transition if you want to just comment briefly on the origins of ExPat Lit. How long has it been around? Is it your first venture into publishing? How did you end up here? That kind of question.
I've been doing this for about 10 years. ExPat was on my lips as early as like 2010. Then by 2011, we had a small website called expatlitj.com, which doesn't exist anymore. And we would just publish writing periodically from like a lot of musicians, actually. Back then I was like sort of like I would hang out with musicians, and a lot of them were good writers, and they had only like a passing interest in publishing. Teresa Smith and Eric Cecil, whose books I ended up publishing, were some of the first that caught my eye. And I was just like, not only is nobody like willing to put this out, but the writers themselves are resigned to not really like take it seriously. So we wanted to make zines. Originally, that's how it started. It wasn't like meant, I could never have imagined that it would have gotten this far, but where we are now. But it started with zines, and our first print issue came out in 2013, March 2013. We still have copies of it, actually, surprisingly. And we've done 3 other issues since then. And then like expatpress.com in its current incarnation, I believe, took off in like 2016. And that's when we started like going hard with like single author volumes, books, and things like that. And then the features rotation, which became daily when the pandemic started, and we're winding down finally, I think. But I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
No, definitely. It's interesting that musicians sort of played an early role in being early submitters and publishers with ExPat. It makes sense aesthetically. This is a very over. I'm trying to avoid saying that ExPat has a punk aesthetic. That's an overdone piece of terminology, but certainly it's a little bit reminiscent of that kind of DIY basement show notion, going back to the idea of art going straight from the artist to the viewer, to the reader. That's something that I don't know what the current state of the music scene is. I'm not really plugged into it, but historically the music scene, the music industry has had that sort of bleeding edge of a more direct, performer audience relationship. And in literature, as we sort of discussed, there's always been this thick wall of middlemen in the publishing industry, but presses like ExPat, kind of bring that much more direct, basement show sort of feel. And I think that's what I see as part of your aesthetic.
Sure, yeah, it's a very like kind of Spartan anarchist flyers, DIY. Obviously, this is like our background, and the music thing is. I wouldn't necessarily like rush to call us punk, but it's a fair like sort of like free association. And I think like the music thing is interesting to me because I've been in bands, and a lot of writers that I know that have been in bands have have sort of sublimated this notion of performance, like you said. When it comes to readings, ExPat has put on 5 events this year, and I've like sort of deliberately, but maybe not explicitly, tried to redefine like what a reading is. Sort of like I don't want this association when people hear reading, they think it's like this boring hoity-toity affair at a bookstore with like creaking like desks and tables and like just like this sort of like uptight affair. I like, whereas like the events we've put on have really resembled more like punk or hardcore shows or something. I've tried to call them shows because I think it's more formally correct to sort of like perform, get into character, orate. Like the book should be like a ball of light in your hand. You should you should have like this relationship with the audience that I think people in bands tend to get more than like the Victorian poets of today.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
No, I'm kicking myself because there was an event in LA where I live that I unfortunately got held up at work, and not held up like held up in a fucking gas station with a gun, but I mean I got I unfortunately missed Elizabeth Aldrich's reading. But
you're in LA?
Like I am in LA, so do keep in touch if there's more events like that down the line.
I thought for some reason y'all were based out of New York. But...
Well, I am in New York, and I actually wanted to ask about ExPat was seemingly involved in NPC Fest and Angel Fest.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, see how did that go, and what do you guys have to say about that?
Angel Fest was a glorious train wreck. It was the best and the worst of all the experiments we've done with like readings. It was just an incredibly large crowd, and it was sort of like every kind of people obsessed with finance, art, like, you know, Hollywood cretins. There were a lot of people there, you know, from different like intellectual backgrounds and career backgrounds, and it was huge. It was loud. It went on way too long. It was a marathon. I'm actually work currently. I haven't said this like publicly yet, but I'm working on a new novel, and I'm like sort of writing a fictionalized version of Angel Fest, because sort of like magnifying the monstrous optics of it. And,
awesome.
And like I don't know, I'm thinking a lot about Berserk lately, and particularly like the Eclipse saga of that. I don't know if y'all are into anime, but anyway, like it really felt like we were fighting evil that day. I mean, somebody died at the thing. Like,
wow.
Yeah, like there was like there was a lot of like tragedy and really like kind of cursed heavy energy, but also like just exuberance and like, you know, getting through it. You know, Antifa picketed it, which was interesting. Like,
I did hear about that.
Yeah, they got in, and like, and I just like, we were getting like the most murderous scowls, and I mean, it was just like, it was really, so the answer is, it was, Angel Fest was incredible. I mean, like, I heard from impartial parties that it was the best reading they've ever been to, like, by far.
Yeah, like, this is crazy for a literature reading. Like,
right.
As you say,
there's never
typically
been like
readings
that.
Are in bookstores with red wine, and I mean, this is like off the wall.
Yeah, completely off the wall. There's never been anything like that. There may never be anything like it again. I mean, we'll see. But it, like, I never thought personally that I would be like, you know, standing next to like Moldbug, like watching other readers read. That's definitely not something that I ever thought would happen when we were like posting quotes by him on like anonymous internet forums in the early 2010s and stuff like that. And, you know, just like rubbing shoulders with all these people associated with NPC Fest, which is a much bigger like thing than ExPat. And like, yeah, I mean, that all started with meeting Anne Manov, and she basically just said, would you read with Moldbug? And I said, yeah, of course. And she was like, really? Okay, could you like ask a few people that? And that is literally how I invited everybody to read at Angel Fest. I was like, would you read with Moldbug? And
awesome.
A lot of people said yes, and I was really happy to have them. Some said like no, and I don't know. It was but yeah, that's how it all came together. It was crazy. It was definitely like one of the wildest weekends of my life. And
this was back in October, right?
Yeah, it was October 23rd. Was the Angel Fest event. Yeah.
Gotcha. Wow.
And just for everyone is Personality Girl, right?
Yep, that's her.
On Twitter.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow. I mean, Manuel, you've described yourself as a political orphan. Obviously, you know, there's the relation with Moldbug and some of these other characters. Matt Forney has a kind of dissident right background. Mm-hmm. Again, you've described yourself as a political orphan, so I'm not trying to get you to label yourself politically one way or the other. But I guess I'm kind of curious. For, you know, there is, I won't even call it ideological, but there is right at the beginning, you know, I said out like, is this outsider lit or is it dissident lit? And you opted for dissident because there is a kind of counter hegemonic nature to the project. So
yeah,
I guess I'm curious.
It's the counterculture for sure. Like,
yeah, you I presume, like many of us, you've probably been interested in literature for a while.
Yeah.
Where did the kind of counter-cultural or counter-hegemonic aspect sort of slip in? Was that sort of a seamless thing that maybe happened online, or was that sort of always part of the literature you were attracted to?
I think when like sort of the culture wars were intensifying by around like 2017 or something, ExPat always sort of like took a hard line, like on free speech. Like we've had to. I mean, like tech censorship is completely out of control, and you know, the kinds of things that I never thought I'd like. You know, it's as far as like being a political orphan, I've just like sort of like come and like I've always sort of been like I'm not allergic to different perspectives, and I don't really know that anything in politics is really anything but a LARP at this point. Like,
right?
I mean, it's like what am I? I would say I'm like a Washingtonian Republican. Like, it's not. I mean, just almost like as a glib joke. Like, I guess you could, if you want to like just out me, you could say that like I'm a post Bernie bro or something who was like radicalized by the unhinged like left and found myself sort of, you know, making friends with a lot of the right. And the reason I mean, I don't know, it's a big topic. I think that I don't really necessarily think that the right is really like getting the vacuum that they could fill right now. Like there's
absolutely.
And I don't there's nothing, I don't consider expat political at all. And I don't consider myself political. I hate politics. I mean, generally speaking. But I'm going off on a tangent. I guess what I'm saying is that, yeah,
no, it's good.
This has always just been about like freedom of expression, and you know, me and like William Duria from Misery Tourism, who is like, you know, like William is like, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he's basically like a lib, you know, and like, so I get along with like all kinds of like self-identifying political people, you know what I mean? I wouldn't politically identify one way or the other, but yeah, I mean, like it's a real shame. I mean, the left completely lost that sort of battle, I think. And I think it's like things like cancel culture are on like Suicide Watch. I think that people want the kinds of things that they're being told that they're not allowed to have these opinions, not allowed to read certain things, and that just makes me like real defiant and want to like double down on it, you know. Plus, like I just really don't like these people. They have this like really like militant sort of like insectile approach to trying to like cancel you, and you know, like they engage in these like smear campaigns. It's like really like weird snitch like postmodern online behavior that just like doesn't. I spend very little time online these days because like honestly, like a lot of that stuff just kind of ruined it for me, especially after the pandemic and, you know, the acceleration of all like this atomization. But yeah, I don't know. I hope I've sort of answered your questions.
No, absolutely. I think it's a great answer because these are strange and exciting. I guess that's the positive spin. These are strange and exciting times we're living in, and it's kind of hard to define what exactly is kind of happening in the culture and in the political culture and in the, you know, in counterculture and as far as it relates to politics.
It's a realignment of sorts along like
a realignment,
cultural.
But also like, yeah, definitely a realignment, but also I feel like the realignment hasn't totally settled yet. Like we're still kind of in the cloud of dust, and it's, yeah, I mean, there's no need to define oneself necessarily as like politically right or left with some of this. It's like, it's just, yeah, the realignment is so strong, and the forces which, it's not even like so much that, oh, like we need to be able to talk about X, Y, and Z. It's like literally just the, you know, the openness and the people need to feel that they can express themselves.
Yeah.
And from the left, you have people who, you know, are just completely the antithesis of creativity with regard to that.
Like, what we know is that you can't really be a member of the establishment, a card-carrying member, a lib, and like an artist right now, because free speech and the ability to express yourself is outside of the mainstream. So yeah, I mean, I think like that's certainly the process that Matt and I have gone through, and it sounds like the process that you've gone through as well, Manuel.
Yeah, I mean, not to like draw a line or anything, but if you're like, like part of the literary establishment, like you basically have like no business writing poetry. I mean, it's
Yeah.
if you've had like a lot of things like handed to you. I mean, there's like a subtle like rage, and I'm paraphrasing a lot of my friends, a lot of people that I really admire online. You know, it's like it's very high IQ to engage and have a willingness to be engaged, and like I think it's like also just like writing is something that's so elemental and happens should happen like for like you know not for the reasons that they tend to happen, which like in MFA circles with the academy and with like you know big publishing with like front loaded advances and like kind of like a cart before horse like marketing campaigns. Yeah, I mean like I don't think that that stuff is like real. I think a lot of what my preoccupations these days is just kind of like parsing out what little is left that's like actually real. So much of the publishing industry, when I say like it's a glass house, it's just like completely fake. Everything from like the reviews to like the book sales, like the spin. I mean, and it's becoming more and more transparent. You know, when you have like these huge books, I kind of don't want to like name names, even though I probably already have, but it's like you have these huge books that seem to get like fuck it, I'll name names like you know Fuck Boy by Sean Thornton Rowe, like you know 200 grand advance. If you look it up on Twitter, it's got like almost no engagement or you know attention. I think Sam Pink did a good job. I mean, his move was to sort of like take his indie cred away, and I think he sort of did that, and that audience isn't going to take the book seriously. And the book is exactly what I'm talking about by the pale horse shuddering. It's this caricature of like basically like masculinity as it's like as this agenda, as the propaganda agenda machine like allows, you know, as far as it allows. So it's like tweaked in such a way where it's acceptable, you know, like to be this like sort of like womanizer, you know, like who's like very reflective about masculinity in the age of Trump and late capitalism and all that. It's got all these like buzzwords attached to it.
Absolutely.
But the thing that's interesting to me is just how fake it seems. Like it doesn't seem like it has any actual genuine support outside of like his friends, you know, like and it's like and there's like 200K invested in it, and I just wonder, it's coming out soon, like I wonder how it'll do. But.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to describe the sort of cultural and political realignment that we've been discussing, and it is hard to define, but it seems like it's increasingly this, you know, so we're moving beyond right versus left in certain respects. In other ways not, but in certain respects just kind of culturally that distinction is getting fuzzy. And some people would say like, but I think it's oversimplistic to say that we're not like going towards like the haves and the have-nots. That's the other sort of narrative you hear. I think what it comes down to is like you have people who, and especially with the COVID of it all, where we moved even further away from economic issues and that kind of bread and butter stuff and more towards like, will you wear a mask? Will you get your third vaccine, etc.? Which, by the way, I'm not even a COVID skeptic per se, so I'm not saying one thing or the other about that. The point I'm trying to make is the realignment looks a lot more like, are you willing to hit X, Y, and Z shibboleth, sort of subscribe to this narrative, this overarching sort of mainstream narrative, you know, inflected with, you know, the influence of the alphabet organizations, etc. You know, will you buy into that? What Moldbug calls the cathedral. You know, there's other terms that other people have. Or are you somehow at odds with that? You know, do you prefer, you know, for reasons of ideology and politics, or even just for cultural reasons, or even just because the whole thing seems sketchy? You know, do you prefer to stand outside of that in some capacity? And I went on I guess a tangent there, but
Yeah,
You know,
no, I mean
yeah.
you're touching on a lot of like big topics, and I guess I'm just gonna sort of like I wouldn't say I completely co-sign like the neo-reactionary analysis of power, but like as far as yeah, I mean you read the news these days for the narrative. You don't read it for like information, you know. And like there is a sort of like totalitarian narrative being disseminated. And there's a lot of like symbols of obedience to this sort of narrative as well. There's a lot of fuckery with the culture wars where, you know, people, they want us to sort of like be divided over like meaningless things. The reason I say that politics is kind of a LARP is because so much of what these like extremist political gurus or like people want, like it's not something that you can vote for on the right or the left, you know what I mean? So
Right.
it's not really like actionable like on any level. So it doesn't like really like matter, but the narrative and what you subscribe to is like sort of the important thing here, because we're more vulnerable and susceptible than ever to a kind of like media psyop that is totally inclined to make us like, you know, docile and just sort of, you know, knee jerk with how we
Uncle Yarf would call them, gigaphone.
Yeah, and there's a class war narrative as well, but I agree that it's like reductive, you know, that like that between the haves and the have-nots, and that I mean that's probably like more like clear, I think, than like something like a culture war or whatnot. But like, yeah, I don't know, to triangulate like the sort of like nuance of all this, it's not just about like haves and have-nots. It's about people who want culture to answer to no one, and people who want culture to sort of like fall in line with like the agenda, the propagandistic agenda, which is like you know, very anti-eros and anti-freedom and generally just antagonistic in general, like negative,
increasingly so.
And like hostile, and it's just like it's not like that's why I'm not like on Twitter a lot any days, because there's just like it almost seems to conduce this like combative like mode in people, and I would just rather focus on the work and put that out. And then the other thing is, having these events has shown me people are just like a lot nicer in person. No one has any time for like rude people, you know what I mean? So like at the end of the day, like, you know, we all want to participate in polite society, and I don't have any dirt under my fingernails. I don't know if anyone else does, but I want to like shake hands with people. And I think ExPat has always drawn a very broad, like maybe unprecedented, you know, if I can toot my own horn for a second, coalition of like readers and people who go to these readings from across the entire political spectrum, getting along, maybe privately not getting along, but all enjoying culture. You know, there hasn't been an Astroworld like riot. I was getting really deep into this Astroworld thing last night.
Oh yeah,
so, like,
that's interesting stuff.
But like I've thought about it, because it's like we had up to like 100 or more than 100 people at some of these events. You know what I mean? And sometimes it felt like, you know, overcrowded, and but it was like nothing but peaceful, and like, you know, there was definitely an air of antagonism and conflict, but in a good way, in a situationist way, you know, if we want if we want to like follow that, like what people are calling the vitalistic imperative, you know, we want to just go where the energy is, you know, and sort of like capture it, you know. And it's like I have this like sort of like detached conceptual way of curation where I just don't feel like I just think I'm not doing a service to any sort of event or literature or anything by doing anything other than like putting it on and offering it without much comment, you know.
just kind of letting
Absolutely.
it happen in that
let it
situation
happen.
is
Yeah,
like-
just let it happen
Yeah.
to capture it. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you described, I mean, that's kind of been my impression of ExPat Lit and of you. Not knowing much about it beyond that, it was a publishing house that was like, friendly towards Terror House and people on like Frog Twitter.
Yeah. Sure.
Not knowing much about it, that was always my image. Is like this totally apolitical kind of place of open expression, which seemed amazing to me. And it seemed like there was, that's one of the few reasons we wanted to bring on the show. Is just like I wanted to know more, and it sounds like I'm wrapping up. I'm not. I think we still have conversation ahead of us, but definitely glad to glean this greater understanding of your work and of ExPat. And yeah, no, it's great stuff.
Yeah, well, we did. We found all the frogs, and we welcome them.
Yeah.
No, but like
Well,
I don't want to seem. I also don't want to seem like some kind of like ironist or something. Everybody that I've ever put on an ExPat, I am really interested in their work and admire what they're doing. So like it's never like a sideshow. Like, oh, this is like some like fringe caricature that's gonna piss a lot of people off. I will say.
Oh, it doesn't come across like that either.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I will say that some people I've worked with were like that. Like some of the people at NPC Fest. I hope like no one gets mad at me for this, but I'm speaking freely. It seemed like a lot of the like the drive behind that was just like, how do we piss off the liberals as much as possible?
Right. I mean, that was kind of that was like what the alt-right was back in 2015, 2016, and that that had its major pitfalls, and I think that it ended very badly for a lot of people, shall we say?
Right.
And yeah, there was that notion of like pissing people off for the sake of pissing people off. Maybe that has its place, but I very much think it's not well suited to the moment we're in now, and that the moment we're in now is in a lot of ways more interesting and more vital for the production of literature as opposed to just like memeing and what have you. The other thing I was going to comment on what you said previously is, that notion that all politics is LARPing. It's a notion that I would have been resistant to earlier in life. Like I'm kind of, in some ways I am a political person. I always try to be positive. Like, maybe this can be done. Maybe these political changes can be made manifest. I'm resistant to the notion of just like shrugging it off like it's all bullshit anyway. But I mean, the moment we're living in now, it's so patently obvious, as you said, that all politics is a LARP, and that none of the changes that the sort of fringes on either side want to affect they don't really seem to have much of any hope of coming into fruition now. You're better off thinking of politics and that sort of, perhaps, and I know you didn't want to co-sign on all of that.
No, but the cathedral, yeah. I mean, there's definitely like truth to that, like idea that politicians are just gonna promote egalitarian ideas and democratic ideas, but they're not really going to do anything. And I do think that like the seat of power is closer to like the media and the academy and like oligarchs and corporations than they are to like partisan politicians.
Definitely. I mean, so along with that, it's like as far as one should be thinking about politics, it's, you got to think about it in these kind of Moldbugian, raw sort of just power dynamics. How does one consolidate power away, which is, is what it is. And then in terms of the sort of more granular stuff, the type of issues that maybe animate one on a day-to-day basis, what have you, it's almost like it's a better time to kind of, I don't want to use the word sublimate, but it's like almost a better time to put your more niche interests, like find the literature in that right now, as opposed to, politics, which is kind of this mire. I say this to kind of get around, like, to sort of lead to the notion that if politics is all LARPing right now, the sort of compensation for that is that I think it's a really good time for creativity, and it's a good time to kind of, as you said, focus on the work, focus on one's own work and that of, your friends. it's a good time, and it's a fecund time. I hope I'm using that word right for a certain kind of creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, for fun. I mean, for exuberance. I mean, like there's probably a limit to like what private things I'm willing to I should divulge out of just out of reverence to taste. But like my girlfriend is a liberal, and like it's just like we get along and we're so compatible in like these fundamental ways, and we make jokes about the sort of things that like people get really angry about, you know what I mean? Like she'll say that, oh, are you hanging out with the alt-right, you know what I mean? And I'll like, I'll call her like my little libtard, and it's like so we've like fetishized it, and like it's made humor out of it, and like
that's awesome.
And it's like it's like she's not humorless, and I don't think that people. I think there's a benign banality to it that gets missed. I think with a lot of like to be fair, with a lot of like people on the right online who see like life as kind of like this like battle for the soul of America between like demonic and angelic forces and things like that. Like actually, I've met people who work at like New York Times and Paris Review. I've had friends that I've grown up with, and it's a lot more benign and banal than you might like think, at least at that level. You know what I mean? There's a machine definitely operating behind like them that is like extremely like abstruse and alienating. But like, but ultimately, I think like our differences are pretty benign. It's just a question of like, I don't know, the whole like pro-mask, anti-mask thing. A lot of like people who are pro-maskers are just doing it out of politeness. And like, somebody like me maybe doesn't value politeness that much. Maybe I value like civil disobedience more or something in this case, but like, it's not, like we don't, it's like always ask like cui bono, who's benefiting from like these polarizations, like, can we all come together and just like sort of appreciate good art, and sort of eliminate all these like toxic things that just like that kill it. I mean, that have like that ruin it, that just like are they're anti-art, anti like inquiry, anti-engagement. You know what I mean? It's like I guess I'm just like circling tangents now, but
no, it's all good.
You want to pick up from that? Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, this might be an okay transition to talk a little bit about. I almost should have done this earlier in the show, but just wanted to comment on my familiarity with certain people that ExPat is publishing, and sort of ask, I guess, what kind of fiction ExPat is looking to publish for any of our listeners. But before I ask that, I'll say, like, my relationship with I wish I'd read more ExPat titles than I have, I admit, and I kind of in the new year I hope to read more, and I hope that we have more ExPat writers on this podcast.
Absolutely.
Elizabeth Aldrich's book, Precious Little Things, is that what it's called?
Ruthless Little Things.
Of course. Ruthless Little Things has been on my reading list for a while, but I think the first book I ever read from ExPat was James Nolick's The Moon Down to Earth, and I also mean to read some of his other titles. He actually blurbed my book that I published with Terror House. Awesome. And then also, just to comment on the sort of Terror House relation, you guys published Calvin Westra's book somewhat recently, right? And he's a Terror House alum, so... As one can see, there is a kind of rich network, I think, between Terror House and ExPat, and between all of us. But to circle back, if you want to comment briefly on like what kind of fiction you're looking for to publish, if you have any submission guidelines or anything you want to comment on, and just in terms of like. Yeah, what's the future looking like for ExPat?
Well, briefly, I want to comment on like these sort of like uneasy alliances. I mean, they're not uneasy at all. That makes it sound more dramatic than it is. But these unlikely alliances, I don't think that Matt Forney and I are that similar. I think we come together on like some things, but we found ourselves, this is part of like the realignment, you know, we found ourselves like on the same side of like, of I guess like the cultural war of the faithful opposition to the cultural hegemony. As far as like what ExPat is looking for to publish, I mean, I'm very protective of like the element of surprise. So we've got like a slate of titles that we'll announce sometime like early next year. We've only announced one so far, and like we're still kind of a ramshackle operation. I don't want to speak too much, like lest I jinx it or anything, but maybe we'll be able to do more this next year, more than like putting out like 5 books a year. It's hard to say. I mean, we get a ton of submissions. We've gotten just a complete like cornucopia of submissions for like 2 years now, and solicitations, and I'd say we reject like most of them. I don't really know what it is. Like, I've always thought of like ExPat as kind of like a Rorschach or like an inkblot. Like there's something abstracted from me about it that attracts people. I know people have like looked at our logo and thought that it was like a slant nod to NRX, you know, like people have looked at our logo and thought it's like, you know, maybe like Christian iconography with like the crooked cross or whatever,
Yeah.
which granted, like, I will like admit that like, you know, like certain iconography sort of influenced that. But like, my point is that I want to, like, there's no submission guidelines for a reason on ExPat, you know, other than like, you know, we want fiction, etc. Like, and we've run all kinds of different stuff that I think fits. And the criteria that goes into it is just more like, can I make this an event? Can I promote this? Can I pound the pavement and carnival bark about this, basically? Like, is this something that people have an appetite for? Is this something that's missing? You know, we want to sort of like counter what's in vogue. For instance, like our next book coming out, American Kashayas by Durbin Moffer, is really heavy with things like satire, which are like very out of fashion nowadays. It's maximalist, which is extremely out of fashion, you know. But then again, you know, we have Calvin Westra. Calvin Westra is like very influenced by like alt lit, and like writes in this mostly in this like very like economic way, you know, and he's just like an incredibly like lean editor. So I don't know that there's like, it's hard to say that there's one thing that unites like all ExPat releases. And I kind of like that about it. I guess if it's anything, it's like, we just want to put out books that no one else wants to put out, basically, and like stuff that's just like interesting to me of the moment. There's so much shit coming out now that like would not have seen the light of day if not for us or Terror House or whomever, or other small presses. You know, 9-Banded Book, 1111, Apocalypse Party. I'm just gonna throw them all in there, like it or not. And like, you know, it's like, so we have to like sort of understand that our obligation. There's two very like material objectives that I have. One of them I'm going to crib from Calvin Westra. I think Calvin Westra, he's a very like humble, like simple guy. I don't want to talk too much about him, but he wants to create a body of work, like a simple body of work, a canon, and then die happy, as he says. And I'm going to steal that. I would like to do that as well. And I also, the other material goal is we want to usher in the next generation of writers that are not going to be ushered in by big presses. They're going to be ignored. They're going to be silenced, you know? So it's like on us. Like the way I see it is like, this is now, this is like, and if we don't do it now, if we don't strike while the iron's hot, like who will, you know? And so I almost feel like there's like a moral obligation. I mean, not to be self-aggrandizing or anything like that, but like,
no. You know. That's an incredible answer. I mean, I was kind of going to ask that too. Like, what if ExPat? I know ExPat does not have a formal mission statement. And by the way, I think it's great that there's an air of mystery about it. Like, what does this mean? I think you cultivate that very well. But it's great to hear that if you did sort of have a mission statement, you know, I hear what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, mystery is good. I think like ambiguity is good. I relish ambiguity. Like I think there's just a lot of freedom in that. and like in doing everything ourselves, I think we're the only press, not to take anything away from anyone else, but we're the only press that doesn't use any print-on-demand services, or we don't. I think amphetamine sulfate doesn't use Amazon or have barcodes or something. We do have barcodes, but we don't use Amazon. And everything we publish, we do through a mom and pop, like brick and mortar press in the United States of America. And we're involved with the process intimately all the way through.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And again, we're trying to, I really think of it as like a kind of revolution that's happening, that's just beginning.
Sorry.
We're outselling a lot of the publishers with much more resources than we have, and we're just getting like killed by overhead. But there's something revolutionary happening, and I'm waiting for the black swan. There's been I know, John Lindsay's book Body High with House of Vlad, I think might be the biggest indie bestseller of all time. I'm not totally sure, but it's definitely like a high watermark for like House of Vlad. Like a lot of these books are still selling really well outside the system, and at some point, like, it's going to become increasingly apparent where the energy is in art. Art has always been sort of like guided by like cultural momentum, and the momentum is on our side. So
yeah,
I liked what you said about it being a sort of moral imperative to publish these works, because people do need to step up and make sure that real art gets out there. And it's great that we have publishers like ExPat and Terror House, and I think to an extent the unlikely ally thing, or not unlikely necessarily, but is the fact that you're both willing to publish things that the mainstream won't.
Yeah, I just want to say categorically, censorship is completely indefensible. It's a crime against humanity. It's like just the moral imperative comes not so much from like publishing people that are disenfranchised, but people who are actively stonewalled. Like in places like New York City, especially, I think like you can feel it a lot more. People who are like just actively being told that what they're writing isn't like it, like we're supposed to like be authentic in our writing. It's the one place where we can do that, where we can like be ourselves, shine a light on the parts of the id that we like tend to suppress, that we want to suppress in real life, and it's like people are being told like, no, that you're not the right kind of queer or POC or whatever identity you want to like use, and it's
that sounds very familiar, though I am not queer or POC, but I've written a novel recently, and sometimes it's just not the right flavor for the establishment, and that's, in a way, that's good, in my opinion. It's we're on the right track.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess the strategy is to just sort of like wait them out and see what we can do. But yeah, it's cool because it's like I'm very lucky to be able to do this, and the world is very lucky that we have people like this. Publishing is really a full-time job and a really like difficult thing, really like time-consuming and intensive. And it scales like depending on like what you're doing. If you're using like print on demand, if you're using like it's so much goes into it, but the fact that I can do it like gives me the moral obligation. If not me, like nature abhors a vacuum. It's like I don't know, I can't see a future in literature without the small presses, I guess, like, which I hesitate to call small presses at this point, but because they're doing such big things, as Dennis Cooper would say. Man, I'm just paraphrasing anybody. If I ripped you off on this podcast or one of your highly original thoughts, just let me know. I'll give you a shout out. But yeah, I'm always sort of like sublimating what like my friends are onto. We're often onto the same things. There's somebody else. None of these are original ideas. There are other people having these same ideas, like all over the world, involved with the same thing. This is what I've learned being in it for this long. So basically most of it is bullshit, and the stuff that's authentic is so precious. But, So
Now there was
Gosh.
just one
Go on, sorry. Go on.
thing I wanted to drill down on that you mentioned earlier in relation to fuckboy, and that was the idea, and maybe I'm misinterpreting here, but that literary fiction that is written by frankly straight men needs to be to be published in the mainstream, needs to be a sort of like of an apologetic tone, or a sort of like embedded mea culpa, like I'm sorry for being a fuckboy, which
Yes.
is something that like Matt and I have talked about a lot, and how like if you're going to write as a straight male, like it's very hard to be honest, because like honestly I'm not apologetic. I don't think I need to apologize to anyone.
Right.
So that is a tone that is like difficult to get published today.
Yeah, and as you shouldn't be apologetic, and yeah, I mean, it's like Sean Thornton-Rowe has on his Wikipedia profile that he's a Japanese American. I mean, like I know people who thought he was black. Like he registers as a white male if you meet him, and
Yeah.
it's just like it's all when you look at it, it's like there's all these little like buzzwords and like details that are in place that make this a marketable title, that make it safe for them to publish. That's what this is about. Like, and the credibility is just hemorrhaging when you see all these like blurbs from people who have clearly not read the book that seem like completely just antithetical to reality. Like, you know what I mean? It like you'll like blurbs like a completely original voice. I've never read anything like that. Like, or it's just like it's just like it's not reality. It's like we see you and we see that you're like absolutely not that we're not that you're not like you're not like this isn't the news media isn't really reporting reality anymore. You know what I mean? It's like
Absolutely.
it's like we really have to be so discerning now. And yeah, I mean, like, I think the genuine article will always sort of prevail. People will always have an appetite for the genuine article, even if it's kind of like to use us for that, even if it's just kind of like to take our influences and make it presentable or something like that. I mean, there's a big history with like punk rock in this too, how like the Ramones kind of like unwittingly invented punk rock and never had a hit album their entire careers. And then a lot of people who saw them went out and like made punk rock their own thing and had hits, and they hated it. They hated being like blacklisted from it. When you're creating something, you can't really like know what it is, and then like by the time you know what it is and are like, okay, like this is the demographic we need to appeal to, the time you're getting into like the corporate strategizing like element, like the people, the OGs will get left behind, like invariably. And they won't get that success. So maybe there's something kind of like tragic about it, but I'd like to be more romantic about it as well. Like, I don't like to like sort of be pessimistic. I'm very grateful for like all the readership that we've gotten. I'm like blown away by it. I could like, I mean, yeah, like we could certainly all use more money, but like and the kind of money that like people are getting as advances for their first book, would be helpful.
Crazy town.
So like, but at the same time, I don't want to like dwell in ressentiment or anything. Like, so it's like at the end of the day, it's to each their own. But like like people are so loath to pick sides these days, and I say pick a side, don't play both sides. Like like stand for something and be like let people know like who you are, and like all that integrity counts for a lot. Like and people will remember it. I maybe that's naive, or maybe it's romantic, I don't know, but like
no, I share the optimism. I think everything we've discussed today, I think it really is a really thriving scene in terms of creativity, and the audience is growing, and I think there is a warranted romantic sense about it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Totally. Yeah.
It's a good place to be right now.
It is. It's exciting. I mean, for the holidays, I think we've all earned like a good, like little victory lap and repose and stuff. But hopefully, you know, we hit the ground running next year, and you know, there'll be more big things happening. And I don't know. I mean, the struggle will continue. Like there will be.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy. I think what's happening is like kind of just getting started, even though some of us have been around for longer. But it's just like we're laying bare, just by our continued existence, we're laying bare like all the different, like the shortcomings of the people we've come to expect quality content from. You know, even the like smaller houses that are just imprints of the bigger houses, and you know, like there's so much out there that you really got to like kind of check for like authenticity and like what they're about. You know, it's like there so few of it is like genuine, and like it needs to stay special. To echo something that Sam Pink said, like this is like so special, and we need to like keep it that way. Like otherwise it's like not worth it, because it's the only thing that's made it worth it for all this time that like writers haven't been making any money, is that like the reward is the book itself, and that it's ours alone, you know, and it's like belongs to posterity, belongs to the people that find it and connect with it and are influenced by it. It doesn't belong, it's not a brand to be co-opted by like big five publishing and, you know, sold for like exorbitant sums of money. And it's so yeah, I don't know, I agree with that. I think it's like it's something like the things that make it worth it are basically like life and death, skin in the game for me. They're not like just like a hobby. I take it seriously. I think you should too, and anyone involved in publishing should.
Absolutely. It's the real art, the art that we make for ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
To find the others. Yeah.
To find
Exactly.
the others, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know that's definitely a goal of our podcast as well, is to kind of, you know, network, not in a obnoxious LinkedIn way, but in a way of actually like cultivating this social aspect of art and of literature. You know, and meeting people, reading their work. And I'll just add as a plug, anyone listening to this right now should absolutely go to ExPatLitPress.com and check out some of the titles there.
ExPatPress.com, yeah.
I'm sorry, did I not?
No, it's all right.
Anyway, ExPatPress.com, there you go.
It's fine, I know, yeah. Thanks.
But yeah, I guess we've gone for a little over an hour. I mean, maybe it's time to wrap, but
yeah.
Do either of you have anything else to add?
I've had a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on. I have pretty full day ahead of me, I think. But this has been productive. I appreciate you know, the engagement and what you guys are doing, and you know, I don't know if there's anything more to say. I think we've said a lot.
We have. No,
Yeah,
this has been a great show. Yeah.
Like really one of our better ones, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe too much.
Yeah, I think you found something.
But
no, this was awesome.
Yeah. But I appreciate it, and I appreciate you guys being okay with me not really having anything to talk about.
This was great. This was a lot.
I think it kind of worked out for the best almost. There was like this getting to know each other quality that I think it's gonna play great.
Yeah.
But before we get too meta about the podcast, I'll say I'll wrap it up. But Manuel, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, and everybody have a happy holidays and a wonderful New Year.
You too.
Thanks, Manuel.
All right. Take care.
Bye.